How did a soft drink kill 5 people? In 1992, one of the biggest companies on Earth accidentally created 800,000 millionaires overnight. But instead of paying them, they triggered a nationwide uprising. 37 delivery trucks were firebombed, executives fled the country under armed guard, and 5 innocent people lost their lives. This wasn't a war. It wasn't political sabotage. It was a Pepsi marketing campaign. And it all started with a $32 billion typo printed inside a single bottle cap. This is the story of number fever, the deadliest marketing disaster in corporate history. To understand how a soda promotion caused a war, you have to understand the battlefield. The year is 1992. The Philippines is a booming, ambitious market, but it is also a country where the average monthly salary is incredibly modest. For millions of working-class families, every single peso matters. And in the beverage industry, one color dominated this landscape: red. Coca-Cola owned the Philippines. It wasn't just a drink, it was a cultural staple. Pepsi was trailing far behind, holding less than 20% of the market. Pepsi didn't just need a new commercial, they needed a psychological weapon to force people to switch brands. Enter number fever. The concept was brilliantly simple. Pepsi printed numbers ranging from 001 to 999 inside the caps of Pepsi, 7-Up, and Mountain Dew. Every night, a winning number was announced on national television. If your cap matched, you won cash. Most prizes were small, around 100 pesos. But there was a grand prize. A prize so massive it defied logic. 1 million pesos. At the time, that was roughly $40,000, equivalent to 611 times the average monthly salary in the Philippines. Pepsi was no longer selling sugar water. They were selling a way out of poverty. They were selling hope. And it worked flawlessly. The campaign was a masterclass in consumer psychology. Sales skyrocketed by 40%. Families hoarded bottles. Children dug through trash cans for discarded caps. Pepsi's market share surged from 19% to nearly 25% almost overnight. Executives were thrilled. The campaign was so successful that Pepsi extended it by 5 extra weeks. But that extension would be their fatal mistake. May 25th, 1992. 70% of the entire country's population is sitting in front of their televisions, waiting for the nightly news broadcast. The anchor looks at the camera and reads the grand prize-winning number: 349. Across the nation, pandemonium breaks out. But this wasn't the sound of 2 lucky winners celebrating. It was the sound of hundreds of thousands of people. Within hours, the horrible truth reached Pepsi executives. Pepsi tightly controlled the grand prize caps. Only 2 caps with the number 349 were supposed to be printed, complete with a special security code. But when they extended the contest, a catastrophic computer glitch occurred at the printing plant. They didn't print 2 grand prize caps. They printed 800,000. Do the math. 800,000 winners. 1 million pesos each. Pepsi had just accidentally promised to pay out $32 billion US. To put that into perspective, paying that debt would have cost more than half of the entire GDP of the Philippines that year. It was mathematically impossible. At 3 a.m., panicked Pepsi executives called an emergency meeting. They had 2 choices: bankrupt the global corporation or tell 800,000 desperate people that their winning tickets were worthless. They chose the latter. The next morning, Pepsi announced there had been a computer glitch. They stated that the 800,000 caps lacked the correct security code and were invalid. As a gesture of goodwill, they offered to pay every 349 holder 500 pesos, about $18. Nearly 500,000 people accepted the $18, but hundreds of thousands of others did not. You cannot give a desperate person a $1 million dream, snatch it away 12 hours later, and expect them to go quietly. The outrage was immediate, and it was violent. A consumer action group called the 349 Alliance was formed. Boycotts devastated Pepsi's sales. But it didn't stop at boycotts. Pepsi bottling plants were surrounded by angry mobs. Executives were forced to hire armed bodyguards and flee the country amid constant death threats. Delivery drivers refused to go to work because driving a Pepsi truck had become a fatal occupation. At the height of the riots, 37 Pepsi delivery trucks were attacked, overturned, or burned. Then, the true tragedy struck. In Manila, an explosive device was hurled at a Pepsi truck. It bounced off and detonated in a crowd, killing a schoolteacher and a young child. In another incident, 3 warehouse workers were killed when a grenade was thrown over a barbed wire fence into a bottling plant. 5 innocent people were dead, all because of a marketing stunt. The fallout lasted for over a decade. Pepsi was hit with over 22,000 lawsuits. It became the most sued corporation in history over a single event. It took until 2007, 15 years later, for the Supreme Court of the Philippines to finally rule that Pepsi was not legally obligated to pay the grand prizes, stating that the company was not guilty of negligence, but rather a victim of an unfortunate technological error. But in the court of public opinion, the damage was permanent. Pepsi spent millions trying to rebuild their brand, but the trauma inflicted on the culture left a permanent scar. In fact, the disaster was so deeply ingrained in the national consciousness that it created a new slang word. To this day, in the Philippines, if you are scammed, duped, or cheated out of something you were promised, it is called being 349'd. The Pepsi number fever disaster is the ultimate cautionary tale of scale. Marketing is the manipulation of human desire. When you leverage hope as a corporate strategy, you are playing with fire. Pepsi learned the hard way that when you promise people the world, you better make sure your computers know how to count. If you want to see how another massive corporation tried to manipulate the public and failed, click the video on screen now.